Dan, how are you, sir? Good to see you. How's everything going?
Stephen A., great to be with you.
What makes an investigation refuse to go quiet even weeks later? And why, after everything that's been said publicly, do two separate experts still believe there are questions that cannot be ignored? In this video, you'll hear both of those expert analyses in full. Watch until the end, because when you put both perspectives together, the unanswered questions become even harder to ignore. If you enjoy fact-driven true crime documentaries, subscribe and join us as we examine the evidence one piece at a time. Dan Abrams explained.
Dan, how are you, sir? Good to see you. How's everything going?
Stephen A., great to be with you.
Appreciate it, man. Let's get right to it. I mean, the Nolan Wells case has taken on a life of its own, still very much in the news. For those who haven't been following the case, just want to throw this stuff out there. That Wells was an 18-year-old college football player from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. On July 4th, he and a group of friends traveled by private boat to Horn Island, an uninhabited barrier island off the coast of Mississippi. Wells was the only black person on the boat, according to reports. He was last seen on the island around 3 p.m. His friends returned to the mainland without him. Dan, first things first, do I have that right, or as new information has been gathered, at least that part is wrong? What can you tell us?
No, look, there's a lot that we don't know still, but we know a lot, actually. Like I hear everyone saying, we don't know. It's true. There's some things we don't know, but there's actually a lot we do know about what happened. We know the people who were on the boat. We know about the other friends. And that's kind of one of the biggest things to me about this case, right, is when you have probably 7 people who were on the boat, if there was something that happened there and somebody's trying to hide it, 7 people together aren't going to be able to keep that a secret. Mm-hmm. They're going to be able to figure out what happened. If there was something that we don't know yet, or there was something nefarious, and one of those 7 people is going to come forward and tell the truth. So that's one of the reasons why I'm waiting to see, is there any conflict? And I don't mean about small stuff. I don't mean about, was it, 232 versus 235? Right. Yeah, I'm talking about the big picture stuff, like, why did he get off the boat? What happened afterwards? If something happened, those 7 people aren't going to be able to keep giving consistent stories. And that's one of the things I want to see as we move forward.
So, Dan, what I would ask you, first things first, is it a situation where all 7 haven't been interviewed as of yet? Or is it that there's been no conflict in the evidence that they've provided?
Right. Good question, right? We don't know. Right now, the authorities smartly are not getting into the details of exactly who they've talked to, what they've done. Now, the families of the friends and the people who are on that boat are saying, we're cooperating, and there has been nothing that we have heard so far that suggests they haven't been cooperating with the investigation. And, that's when I immediately start getting suspicious, is when people stop cooperating with the investigation. As far as we know, that hasn't happened here. But you're right to ask, is there a conflict in their stories? We don't know at this point. There's been nothing to indicate that up to this point.
The sheriff initially, the sheriff initially said investigators did not suspect foul play, but the cause and manner of death remained undetermined. Can you explain why it's remained undetermined to this point? It's been weeks.
Right. I mean, look, you want to do the autopsy before you officially announce, and the autopsy has been done, but they just haven't announced yet exactly what the results were. As you know, the family also did its own autopsy, which isn't as effective as the first one, right? Because they're getting it afterwards. But there have been autopsies, and we're going to have to see what the results of that are. But, and I heard you talking about this before, about the fact that the police and the authorities came out early on and said, we don't suspect foul play. And I get it, right? In a perfect world, knowing what this case has become, it would have been better if they hadn't said that. But I will also tell you that in almost every case where the authorities don't necessarily suspect a crime, they come out and say it. They say, look, we arrived at the home, the guy had a heart attack. We don't suspect foul play, right? And we don't all go, wait, what? What? Why are you saying that now? Why aren't you waiting for an investigation? We just say, okay, got it. Now, the problem that can occur in some cases will be, well, wait a sec. The authorities said early on that there was no foul play, and now my client is being tried for this case. What happened? That's the danger for the authorities. But I will tell you, it is not out of the ordinary for the authorities to come out and make that kind of, somewhat declarative statement.
If that's true, then this investigation may not be decided by a single piece of forensic evidence at all. It may come down to whether every person who was there remembers that day the same way. Because if even one account changes, the entire timeline could look very different. But according to Dan Abrams, there's another detail that's even harder to explain. Let's listen.
You're right, that he wouldn't have let, they don't know. I mean, that's great to talk about what someone's general proclivities are, but the bottom line is, go.
I would tell you where I raise my suspicion. If it's true that he let the boat leave, but his cell phone was on the boat.
That's my concern.
Wait a minute. I don't know any teenagers that don't let something get away. Their phone, their very line of communication, considering the world that we live in today, how attached kids are to their phones. That's their sole line of communications in most instances, whether it be via text messages, calls, emails, etc. I find that very difficult to believe that you just let the boat go away with your phone on it.
And you have to believe that, again, following on what you're saying, that he forgot it, right? As opposed to intentionally left it. But look, I said to you at the outset, what's the one thing that gives me pause, right? It's that. That's the one thing that so far, again, that doesn't mean there won't be more things, because we don't know about a lot of the things. A lot of them haven't been made public. But of the things that have been made public, that's a bigger concern to me than hearing family or friends saying, well, he's not the kind of guy who would blank, right?
Right.
I'm focused on what is the evidence here. And that's a piece of evidence here that you just
For
cited.
Abrams, that wasn't proof of what happened. It was something else, a question that still hasn't been answered. And if investigators ever find that answer, it could help explain what happened before Nolan was ever separated from the group. But even then, Abrams believes the phone alone won't solve this mystery. He says the real breakthrough may have to come from somewhere else. Here's why.
Before I move on, this is my very last question on this. Right now, you're looking for what? What is Dan Abrams looking to find out, looking to see that will get us closer to a resolution involving this case? Is it testimony from the police? Is it testimony from the family? What is it that you're looking to find out? What should we all be waiting for right now as a priority?
So if we could see the case file, right? I think the thing that I'd be looking for most are the witness accounts. I'd want to hear and see, what did different people say about why Nolan didn't come back on the boat? But again, as I said to you before, that's only one piece of this, right? Meaning, even if there was an issue about him coming back on the boat, it doesn't mean that anybody on that boat killed him, right? I mean, that's still a separate question. So even if that happened, I still am looking to see, are there any people who are on Horn Island who can give relevant eyewitness accounts to this that can help move.
So after examining the investigation, Dan Abrams arrives at one conclusion. The answers may not come from speculation. They may come from the people who were there and from the evidence investigators have yet to make public. But that's only one side of this case, because while Abrams focused on witness accounts and the investigation, another expert examined something entirely different. Not the people, not the timeline, the autopsy. And what that expert found has become one of the most closely discussed parts of the Nolan Wells case.
The pathologist is Dr. Judy Milanak, board-certified in forensic pathology, with no connection to this case or anyone involved in it. She's not speaking as an advocate for the family. She's not speaking for the state. She's speaking as someone trained to read exactly the kind of report at the center of this story.
Here's how she explained it, in her own words.
Melanek, I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist, and I just watched the Nolan Wells press conference, and I wanted to share some context for everyone. Being able to definitively state the cause of death after a body has not been found for several days and has been subsequently autopsied twice with signs of decomposition is incredibly, incredibly unlikely. Drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. So for example, if someone is shot and then thrown in the water, you'll have that gunshot and they'll be bleeding and the gunshot will be the cause of death, and the thrown in the water is not the cause of death. It's not even on the death certificate. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also for any kind of traumatic injuries. Now we got to talk about natural death for a second. If someone has a heart attack while they are swimming, and because they're having the heart attack as they're exercising in the water and they take on water and they drown, the cause of death is actually drowning, and the heart attack is listed on the death certificate under other significant conditions contributing to death. So even though the heart attack might have killed them on dry land, it might not have. Most certainly they wouldn't have drowned on dry land. So we defer to the hostile environment, which is the water, to call it a drowning. Now, identifying natural disease and identifying trauma is relatively easy in a fresh body. It can be very difficult in a decomposed body. His body was found 2 days after he disappeared, and this second autopsy done by Dr. Roger Mitchell wasn't until 4 days later. So we're dealing with quite a bit of decomposition, even if the body was refrigerated during that time. And then we have this other issue of the fact that not all the results are back. The toxicology would have been done on the fluids from the body from the first autopsy. From the second autopsy, you're going to have a lot higher alcohol levels from the decomposition caused by bacteria, not caused by drinking. So again, it's the fluid and blood from the first autopsy that really matter. And the other thing you have to consider.
That distinction, ruling everything else out first, is exactly what makes this case so difficult.
What she flagged wasn't a conspiracy, it was a technical gap, a specific named piece of anatomy that an independent examiner never got the chance to look at. And whether that gap turns out to mean nothing or everything is something only the missing piece itself can answer. That's the tension this entire case sits inside. Not accusation, absence.
Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a football player, described by the people who knew him as strong, athletic, and, importantly, a capable swimmer. On the 4th of July, he joined a group of friends on a boat trip to Horn Island, a remote, federally protected barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. No shelters, no restrooms, no cell service, just sand, water, and whoever else showed up for the holiday. At some point, the group's boat began taking on water, and they headed back to the mainland earlier than planned. Nolan wasn't with them when they returned. Before this becomes a story about evidence and procedure, it has to stay a story about a person. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, stood in front of cameras weeks later and said the only question that actually matters to her: what happened to her son? She's described him as someone who brought joy and light to everyone around him. That's the part of this case that doesn't get resolved by any autopsy report. No matter what the science eventually says, Nolan's family already knows the one outcome nothing can change. Here's what's confirmed so far in order. July 4th, Nolan goes missing after the group's boat trip to Horn Island is cut short. July 6th, a U.S. park ranger finds his body on the island's northwestern shore. July 7th, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performs the first official autopsy. July 10th, an independent, privately funded autopsy is performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell. Late July, the state's autopsy and toxicology report are completed and forwarded to the Jackson County District Attorney. 6 data points, and even laid end-to-end like that, they don't tell us how Nolan ended up in the water. They only tell us how long everyone else has been waiting to find out. Within days of Nolan going missing, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter told the public there were no initial signs of foul play. At that point, no autopsy had been performed. No forensic examination had taken place. To be fair to the sheriff, that statement came with a qualifier. The investigation, he said, remained open. It wasn't presented as a final conclusion. But to a national audience watching a black teenager's death unfold in a state with Mississippi's history, no signs of foul play landed as something closer to a verdict. That's the pattern this entire case keeps repeating. Statements that sound more certain than the evidence supporting them actually is. On July 7th, the legally mandated autopsy took place, performed by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office, independent of the family, the sheriff, and any outside investigator. For weeks, its findings simply didn't exist for public purposes. Jackson County coroner confirmed repeatedly that the office was still finishing its work, specifically waiting on toxicology. An autopsy without toxicology is an unfinished sentence, and for most of this case's timeline, that's exactly what the public was left holding. Nolan's parents didn't respond to the sheriff's early statement with outrage in front of cameras. They responded methodically, hiring their own forensic pathologist and retaining attorney Ben Crump, whose name tends to surface when families believe an official account isn't the complete one. Crump has publicly questioned the assumption that Nolan simply drowned, pointing to his athletic background and swimming ability. That's his position on behalf of the family, not an established finding, and it's fair to label it that way. Grief and suspicion aren't evidence, but they're also not nothing, especially when the family paying for a second opinion has direct personal knowledge of who Nolan was in the water. On July 10th, 6 days after Nolan disappeared, 4 days after his body was found, Dr. Roger Mitchell performed the independent autopsy in Washington, D.C. His conclusion? Cause and manner of death undetermined, pending further investigation. Not an accident, not a homicide. A formal, professional acknowledgement that the evidence available to him wasn't enough to say either with confidence. Mitchell was specific about why. He couldn't directly examine the airway or lungs for water. He couldn't examine the stomach contents. Toxicology wasn't available to him at the time. And there was one more limitation, the one Dr. Melinek would later zero in on. Parts of Nolan's throat, the structures examiners rely on to identify strangulation, had been retained by the state during the first autopsy. They weren't sent with the body for the second exam. So why does the front of the neck matter so much? Here's Dr. Melinek.
And there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of Nolan Wells' anatomy. Why is that important? Because if somebody is strangled, especially manual strangulation, the injuries are going to be to the front of the neck. There may be some redness at the back of the neck as well if, injury comes from behind, but generally this part of the neck doesn't have the major blood vessels and the airway. It's the front of the neck that does. So compression or damage to the front of the airway, that's going to be found in the neck block that is still sitting at the medical examiner's office that was not released with the body. So you may ask, is this common practice for pathologists to keep a portion of the anatomy with them at the medical examiner's office and not release it to the family? And the answer is yes. We will sometimes retain important specimens that have pathology in a jar under formaldehyde at the medical examiner's office for further examination or as evidence. And the absence of that net block is really important because we still don't have information from the first autopsy that has not been released yet. So we don't know if it was kept out of an abundance of caution, meaning that it didn't have any findings and it was negative, or it was kept because it has findings, because there's a broken hyoid bone, or because there's hemorrhage in the strap muscles. Until we get that first autopsy report, we don't know why it's been retained.
That's exactly the part of Nolan's body the state never released. According to forensic pathologists outside the case, that alone isn't evidence of wrongdoing. Retaining tissue for further study in a high-profile case is documented standard practice. It doesn't confirm an injury exists there. It also doesn't rule one out. What it does confirm is this: the one piece of anatomy most capable of directly answering the strangulation question has still never been examined by anyone outside the state's own office. Mitchell's report also documented an area of red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. No lacerations, no skull fracture. Even that detail isn't as simple as it looks.
A second autopsy is often done in cases where there is a high-profile case such as this, or there is concern from the family for foul play, and they're just not getting answers from the medical examiner's office because the medical examiner's office is still doing their investigation and is keeping things under wraps, because if there is foul play, they have the evidence, they have the physical evidence that might be able to trap the killer, and they don't want to release that to the public. Even if there is no evidence of foul play, just the lack of evidence is evidence and is important information that might affect how people are interrogated, whether they're going to tell the truth or not the truth about what happened to him. You have to understand that the medical examiner's autopsy is legally mandated, and it is ultimately the most independent autopsy because it's not beholden to the family, it's not beholden to the prosecutor, to the police, to anybody else. It's an independent agency. So that is an independent autopsy, but it takes time. And it takes time until we get all the information back, including the toxicology report. And to answer the question, if somebody's intoxicated and they drown as a result of their intoxication, meaning that they're just, too intoxicated to be able to swim adequately, the cause of death would still be a drowning, but the intoxication would be considered a significant contributing condition. But because of what I said about alcohol forming from bacteria after death, if the body is decomposed, you have to subtract some of that alcohol because it may have been caused by bacteria and may not have been a sign of intoxication. And you can have up to 0.20 gram percent. So 0.08 is above the legal limit in most states for driving, but you can get up to 0.20 in a massively decomposed body. So it really throws you off when you have decomposition and alcohol to try to figure out whether there was alcohol on board or whether all of it's just been made by bacteria. So I hope this answers some questions about what I saw in the press conference, what other people saw as well. I will go through the autopsy, or at least the report that's been released, with a fine-tooth comb, but these are just my first impressions based on watching the press report.
Which means, even here, the evidence raises more questions than it answers. The report didn't draw a conclusion about what caused it. Outside forensic experts have noted the discoloration could reflect an injury, or something as routine as decomposition, or even the placement of a support block during the first autopsy. Telling those possibilities apart requires microscopic tissue analysis. It's a small detail with an outsized weight in this case, proof that even the parts of Nolan's body that were examined haven't fully given up their answers yet. For most of this investigation, toxicology has been the word everyone keeps waiting on. There's a reason it matters more than people assume. Alcohol readings taken from a decomposed body can be misleading. Decomposition itself produces alcohol through bacterial activity, independent of anything a person actually consumed. The freshest, most reliable toxicology comes from the earliest sample, the one taken during the state's first autopsy, before 4 more days of decomposition set in. That's the sample everyone has been waiting on, and as of late July, according to multiple local outlets, it's finally done. This is no longer a local matter being handled quietly. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has interviewed dozens of witnesses. The FBI is involved. The Coast Guard assisted in the search. Crump's legal team has sent formal notice demanding that all parties and anyone connected to them preserve any recordings, messages, or materials related to Nolan's death, a standard step ahead of anticipated litigation. Crump's team has also said they're working with ocean engineering experts to examine the tides and currents around Horn Island that day, an area locals describe as notoriously rough, especially near the island's western side. None of this confirms what happened to Nolan. What it confirms is that no one involved is treating this as settled. Here's the most recent confirmed development, and it's the one this documentary opened on. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office has completed both the autopsy and the toxicology report, and both have been sent to the Jackson County District Attorney for review. That's a real step forward. It's also not resolution. The findings haven't been made public. The family and everyone watching this case are in the same position they've been in for weeks, waiting for someone else to decide when and how much gets released. Sheriff Ledbetter has asked the public to submit any photos, video, or audio related to that day, a sign the investigation is still actively gathering information, not winding down.
Let's be precise, because this case has earned that. Nolan Wells, 18, disappeared during a 4th of July boat trip to Horn Island after the group's boat began taking on water. His body was found 2 days later. A state autopsy was completed July 7th, an independent autopsy July 10th, concluding the cause and manner of death were undetermined. The state's autopsy and toxicology report have now been completed and sent to the district attorney. Retaining tissue for further examination is standard forensic practice in high-profile cases. Disputed. Whether the sheriff's early statement was appropriately cautious, given how little had been examined at that point. What caused the discoloration on the back of Nolan's head? What the retained neck tissue would show if independently examined. What the newly completed state toxicology report actually says. And still, at the center of everything, how Nolan Wells ended up in the water at all. What made this case resonate far beyond Mississippi wasn't one dramatic piece of evidence. It was the order things kept happening in. A public answer before an investigation, a family's quiet doubt, then a second opinion that could only say honestly that it didn't know either. The reports finally exist. The next question is simple, and it's the only one that matters right now. How long until the people who've been waiting the longest are actually allowed to read them?